What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another discussion video here on the channel. And today, as the title suggests, we are going to be taking a look and seeing what is rotating. Because for those of you who don't know, the standard format, that is the format that I primarily play, and I would say the format that most people primarily play, is undergoing a rotation. Now, you might ask, what does that mean? So every single year, the standard format has a rotation where the oldest, I think it's the oldest four sets, or I'm not entirely sure exactly how the schedule works, but what I do know this year is that the four sets that are going to be rotating out of standard, which means they will no longer be legal, are the Brothers War, March of the Machines, including Aftermath, Dominaria Remastered, and what is the fourth one that I always forget? Phyrexia All Be One. So those four sets are going to be pushed out of standard, no longer legal. And today we're going to take a look and see, of the cards that are in those sets, what are some of the more impactful ones from a standard format perspective. Maybe some of them have direct analogs, and maybe they won't be as missed as people think they will be. But there's going to be some cards we talk about in today's video that are definitely going to be gone for good and not really a clear replacement. So let's go ahead and get right into it. But before we do, a quick word from our sponsor. If you need any singles, sleeves, or sealed product for your next event, be sure to head on over to CoolStuffInc.com. They have some of the best deals available, and you can use promo code DOOM at checkout for 5% off of your next order and get a exclusive Rhino token while supplies last. Cool Stuff Inc. They got cool stuff, and they got it in stock. And with that out of the way, let us go ahead and get started with removal spells. And this is the topic of most people's conversation with regards to cards that are rotating out of standard. Now, the black removal spells that are on people's minds here are Cut Down, Go for the Throat, Anoint with Affliction, Shieldred's Edict, and then I guess to a lesser extent Blot Out. Blot Out mostly used as a sideboard card, not really a main deck card these days. And the big question is, what are the black decks going to look like after the rotation? How big of an impact is losing these removal spells going to be? And I think it's a little bit of both, right? There's certainly some of these that are harder to replace. I think of Cut Down and Anoint with Affliction, mostly because when you're going second against aggro decks, Cut Down is one of the few ways you can interact at instant speed on turn one. And Anoint with Affliction, especially with the rise of the recent VV Cauldron decks, is a very important tool to be able to exile VV, not putting it in the graveyard for their Agatha Soul Cauldron. Now, some of these have some sort of direct replacements, right? Go for the Throat, I think, and to a lesser extent, Shieldred's Edict, sort of easier to replace. You have cards like Bitter Triumph and Shoot the Sheriff, 2-mana removal spells that basically kill anything. Think more people are going to be interested in Bitter Triumph than Shoot the Sheriff, just because paying 3 life is actually pretty good if you're playing with Cecil Dark Knight, because you want to flip that a little bit faster. Again, Cut Down is the one that's harder to replace. Now, the 1-mana removal spells that are going to be legal, I really only have 2 and I look through a lot of the cards from all of the sets that are going to be legal, and the only 2 that I was really able to find were Stab and Tragic Trajectory. Trajectory is a card from Edge of Eternities. It's spoiler. And the issue I have with Tragic Trajectory is it's a sorcery. And there really isn't a good analog to Cut Down at instant speed in black. I mean, like I said, Stab and Disfigure, or actually no, I think Disfigure is rotating, but Stab is basically Disfigure anyways. Maybe you could look at something like Caustic Exhale, but then you probably have to play a lot of dragons. And then, as far as some other options for 2-mana kill spells, something like Long Goodbye or Nowhere to Run. Long Goodbye compared to something like Edict is a bit awkward, because the main reason you're playing Shieldred's Edict is to kill Kaido, and Long Goodbye only kills 3 or less. So you gotta be a little bit careful about that one. And then the last shout out I want to give for new cards here is Arch Enemy's Charm, another card from Edge of Eternities. The removal half of this is BBB, exile target creature or planeswalker. 3 mana is a lot, but it is flexible, and exile is very important against Enduring Curiosity. So as far as removal spells are concerned, we're not doing too bad, right? The next category of cards that I have here are sweepers. And This is something where, looking at the sweepers that are rotating, there's a couple of bangers here. So the 5 cards that I have listed, I guess 5.5: Temporary Lockdown, Sunfall, Gix's Command, Brotherhood's End, and then Choking Miasma slash Glistening Deluge. They're effectively the same card. There's a lot of different versions of 1BB, give all creatures -2/-2. We're still going to have Malicious Eclipse legal, so those ones are a lot easier to replace because they just keep printing different versions of that. Cards like Temporary Lockdown, Sunfall, and Gix's Command, those are a lot more difficult to replace. Now, with a card like Gix's Command, it is technically a sweeper, but it's so much more than that. It can be a 2-for-1 because you can recur 2 creatures. It can be an edict of their biggest creature. It can be put counters and lifelink on your own creature to help win a race. So maybe calling it a sweeper is a bit disingenuous, but in terms of black removal or black sweepers that kind of can help you compete and fill the gap that Gix's Command left, you have stuff like Deadly Cover-Up, Scavenger Regent, 0 Point Ballad, which, again, another spoiler from Edge of Eternities. I like this card a lot. I think 0 Point Ballad is awesome, just because you can use it for 3 mana on smaller creatures. It importantly counts toughness. So if they have a bunch of X2s and you have a Cecil, you can do it for 2. Your Cecil stays in play and remains 2 power, so be on the lookout for that one. And then with regards to replacing Sunfall and Lockdown, that one's a little bit tougher. I mean, Sunfall, there is Ultima, and there is I can't remember the name of it, but it's the new 5-mana sweeper from Edge of Eternities. It's 3 white, exile all creatures in spacecraft. So it sort of does exactly the same thing as Sunfall without the extra token. So if you need to exile stuff, that could be a card you want to go towards. But I'm going to be honest with you, I'm really scared about Temporary Lockdown rotating. It feels like it is one of those cards that keeps a lot of different things in check and maybe like keeps a lot of nonsense in check. People going wide with tokens and like specifically being able to exile Cauldron and Storm Chaser's Talon against the Blue-Red Prowess and Cauldron decks. I don't know. And you can let me know in the comment section down below, but there's not really an analog for replacing Temp Lockdown. With something like Brotherhood's End, we have a couple options. You can play Slagstorm, Pyroclasm, or Ruinous Rampage. Again, another Edge of Eternities card. So I think for the most part, the sweepers are going to be roughly about the same, with the one exception being Temp Lockdown. I don't really think they're ever going to print another card like Temp Lockdown, and maybe I'll be proven wrong in Edge of Eternities, but yeah, that one is going to be a big loss. Okay, for this next section of cards, I labeled it on my spreadsheet as cards that are hard to replace / create their own archetypes. Yeah, that's a lot. I understand that. That's kind of a lot to parse, but sort of like, I mean, I guess the reading the name explains the name. That's sort of where I was going. You'll kind of understand when we get a little bit deeper into this list of cards, which there's a lot of these ones. So first one I want to bring up is Lay Down Arms, which is, for what it's worth, a removal spell. It's just 1 mana, sorcery, exile a creature equal to the number of planes you control. And you may not think that, like, if you go and look at one of the mono-white tokens decks, basically every other card is going to be legal. Beza, Caretaker's Talent, Enduring Innocence, Carrot Cake, Overlord of the Mistmoors. Effectively, the entire deck is legal, with the exception of Lay Down Arms, right, after rotation. But I don't think the deck is playable without Lay Down Arms. One of the reasons to be a mono-white deck is because you get to play this extremely powerful removal spell that nobody else has access to. And if you're losing the Lay Down Arms, what is the point of even being mono-white anymore? You might as well just dip into a second color, maybe Azorius, maybe Orzhov for some more removal spells. But there's just not really a good reason to be mono-white anymore after we lose Lay Down Arms. Next up, I want to talk about Knight Errant of Eos / Gleeful Demolition. The Convoke deck as we know it, not really a thing after rotation. There may be some sort of token strategy because you still have some powerful effects like Arabella, you have token makers like Resolute Reinforcements, so there might be some sort of token style strategy, but it's not going to be swarming the battlefield as fast as Convoke did with Gleeful Demolition and Knight Errant of Eos. I guess there's not really a reason to be Jeskai anymore, because part of the reason you were playing blue in the first place was Spyglass Siren for Gleeful Demolition. So there's probably going to be a Boros tokens deck with a card like Frontline Rush, which is very powerful, and some of the 3-mana enchantments like Windcrag Siege or Word Leader's Call, but not going to be necessarily the same as what Convoke looks like now. As far as Omniscience is concerned, I think this deck is basically just dead after rotation. So with the recent standard bannings, Abuelo's Awakening had been removed from the format, and a lot of Omniscience players were going towards Repair and Recharge, which is effectively a 5-mana version of Abuelo's Awakening. And correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, but I went and looked through all of the sets that are going to be legal after rotation, white cards that can return stuff from the battlefield to the graveyard, and I couldn't find anything. Now, you still have something like Reenact the Crime, which is blue, 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 1, return a permanent from your graveyard that was put there that turn. That one is a lot more restrictive because you have to play it in the same turn that you discard the Omniscience, and it's triple blue. Another thing that's worth noting about the Omniscience deck, you're losing Philology Archaeologist, Founding the Third Path, Oracle of Tragedy, and Ifara's Dispersal. You're losing a lot of ways to like churn through your deck. You're losing one of your best pieces of interaction. So there may be some sort of Omniscience deck that is allowed after rotation, but it's going to look a lot different. All right, next up, I want to talk about 3 cards together that are part of, I would say, an archetype that has been doing reasonably well over the past couple of weeks, and that is Guardian of New Benalia, the Mycosynth Guardians, and Phyrexian Dragon Engine. So these cards are sort of the backbone of the Boros Monument, sometimes Jeskai. I think I may have seen a Mardu version of it, but mostly just Boros. And the big reason to be playing this Boros Monument deck is the fact that you have Guardian of New Benalia, which is a discard outlet that you can do on your opponent's turn without paying any additional mana, and the Mycosynth Guardians, which is a way for you to copy Monument to Endurance. And I don't really think you can go super all in on Monument without this sort of redundancy in copying the monuments and that free discard outlet. Maybe you can do something with Artist Talent, where you pair Artist Talent with Monument to Endurance and play a bunch of cantrips, but yet to be seen whether or not that's good. And yeah, I think the Boros Monument deck as we know it is going to most likely fall out of favor. You do still have some white cards available. Well, actually, now that I mention it, Recommission is another card that this deck loses. And this deck was playing for Recommission and 0 copies of Helping Hand because Recommission gets back Monument. So yeah, we may have to look towards a different option if we want to play Monument to Endurance. The next card on this list that I think is going to be pretty difficult to replace is Monastery Swiftspear. So maybe this mono red deck was sort of dead on arrival with the banning of Monstrous Rage and Heartfire Hero anyways, but with Swiftspear leaving and going out the door, I really don't know what your 1-drops even look like. You have Hired Claw, that is certainly the best option that is still available, but after that, I mean, let me know in the comments, but I can't even really think of another 1-drop that you would actively want to put into your deck. Maybe you just up the burn spell count or something like that, but it's going to be really tough for red mages after rotation for sure. Voldaren Thrillseeker is another card that is going to be leaving us, and for the people who do not like playing against the Izzet Cauldron deck, you might be happy to hear that. Now, unfortunately, this is the only card that entire deck loses. Every other card is still going to be legal, all the Makos, the Profs, all that kind of stuff. But I will say the removal of Voldaren Thrillseeker does have at least somewhat of an impact, because now it's going to be a little bit harder for them to combo kill you. Typically, what happens is they just like basically go through their entire deck, dump a Thrillseeker, put it under a Cauldron, and then kind of just use their extra VV mana to fling their creatures at you. But without that angle of attack, I actually think that the deck is obviously going to be playable and it's going to be good, but there might be some more ways to attack it when you're not getting sort of combo killed out of the game. Another card that I want to talk about here, Seed of Hope. similar sort of boat as Voldaren Thrillseeker, where the entirety of the Gruul Delirium deck is going to be legal, with the exception of Seed of Hope, which I'm not going to say that outright kills the deck, because you can still play stuff like Cenote Scout or Rubble Belt Maverick to kind of help grease the wheels a little bit. But Seed of Hope, you're definitely going to lose some consistency. Think about it with a card like Rubble Belt Maverick. Even if you just always mill 2 off of the Maverick, right? Sometimes what happens with Seed of Hope is you actually don't take a card off of it to keep all of the types in the graveyard. So you're milling 2 and putting the instant in the graveyard. With the Maverick, you're just milling 2, which means that you sometimes may have 1 less type for Delirium, and that could certainly matter when you're trying to have those aggressive Delirium starts. How about some black 4-drops? Shieldred the Apocalypse and Archfiend of the Dross, you're out of here. Now, a lot of the Demons decks that were featuring on Holy Annex over the past couple of weeks, a lot of them had moved away from Archfiend of the Dross anyways. They're mostly just playing cheaper demons, and they're replacing their 4-drops with, I guess, more copies of Shieldred, and in some instances, like the white-black versions, they were maxing out on Soulstone Sanctuaries to make sure they had enough demons to trigger Annex without Archfiend. But Shieldred, that one's kind of a big loss, especially with how good it is against a lot of the blue decks in post-board games. It's one of your best cards against Izzet because they draw so many cards. More than half of the spells in their decks say draw a card on them. And Shieldred is one of your best tools because their removal spells don't line up that well against it. Yes, they do have Flood Maw, but that's only a temporary solution. So losing Shieldred, that's going to be a big one for sure. Jace the Perfected Mind is another shout out here for control decks. I'm sure they'll be fine. They'll probably just play some other sort of different Planeswalker. Maybe they'll play more Elspeths. Just wanted to mention it here and bring it up because control decks do play it a lot. Another Planeswalker that a lot of, well, not a lot of people, but basically every single version of Insidious Roots playing 4 copies, Tyvar Jubilant Brawler. And unfortunately, also, we can put Haywire Might in this mix too, because Haywire Might is a card that the Roots decks do play and put under Cauldron and kind of pop off with Tyvar. I don't know if this deck is going to be viable without Tyvar. You certainly still have some stuff legal, right? Like, I mean, obviously Insidious Roots is still legal. You still have the Osteomancer Adept that gets cards from your graveyard and that triggers Roots. You still have Cauldron. But a big reason and a big part of why this deck was so good and explosive is that burst potential that you could just, like, basically have an empty board, play a Tyvar, get a creature back, trigger Roots, and then you're off to the races because all of your Roots tokens can tap for mana the turn they enter the battlefield. And without Tyvar, I really don't know what this deck is going to look like. Maybe it's more of a control deck, maybe it's more of a mid-range deck, but you're definitely not going to have those fast starts and explosive turns as you did previously. Another package deal here that I'm sure a lot of people watching are not going to be upset to see go, which is Zur Eternal Schemer and Leyline Binding. Not a ton to say about these. Obviously, Fs for the domain decks, which, I mean, honestly, they were kind of dead without Up the Beanstalk anyways, but good riddance. At least for me, you two will not be missed. And that brings us to, what else do I have here? Loran of the Third Path. This one was kind of weird. I didn't really know how to put these next 4 cards. We're currently in cards that are hard to replace, which you could kind of say that they're analogs to Loran in terms of there are plenty of instants and sorceries that kill artifacts or enchantments. But specifically Loran, with the ability to recur it or blink it or find it off of certain things that only find creatures, it is pretty unique in what it does. So just keep that in mind. We may have to play some more disenchants, things like that. Dreams of Steel and Oil. This one is a card that I put here, mostly because this one was very, very good against the Cauldron decks. Because if they had a VV in the graveyard, you could not only take a card out of their hand, but also exile the VV from their graveyard for future Cauldrons. So you still have Duress, which can take the Cauldron, but it's not going to be as impactful because they get to keep the VV in the graveyard. And then, rounding off this section, a couple of sideboard cards here, Lithomantic Barrage, Obliterating Bolt, and Tranquil Frillback. just again, these are kind of cards that I wasn't exactly sure where to put on this list, but there's not a ton of analogs for these cards. There's other removal spells, but like I think Barrage specifically, for example, being a one mana way to answer Kaido, losing that is kind of tough, and losing like the combination of losing Barrage and Shieldred's Edict makes me a little bit concerned about the future for Kaido. Okay, next sort of group of cards here I listed as staples that are not irreplaceable. So ones that have sort of a direct analog and you may not even notice the difference that much. So Destroy Evil, Exercise, right? There's not a ton of difference between these cards with the exception of Destroy Evil being instant and Exercise being sorcery, but Exercise exiles, right? So you can exile stuff like Curiosity, so maybe there's even a bit of upside. Soul Partition, you can probably easily replace with Get Lost. Most people were probably playing Get Lost over Soul Partition anyways in the first place, but yeah, there's at least an analog there. Fairy Mastermind, which is a card the Dimir decks play a ton of copies of. Okay, this one's maybe a bit of a stretch. I have Malcolm Alluring Scoundrel as the replacement, and I get it. Malcolm is not the same card as Fairy Mastermind. The only similarities they share are flash 2/1 flyer for 2. But there's also something like Plume Crane Escort you could maybe play, another flash 2/1 flyer. The point that I'm getting at is there's enough 2/1 flash flyers for 2 mana if you're in the market for that sort of thing. Where, yes, the ability on Mastermind is very powerful when your opponent is drawing extra cards, and that's not replaceable. But for the tempo aspect of just having a 2/1 flash flyer, you can easily replace that. Terra Sunder, again, this one's a bit of a stretch. Heritage Reclamation, where yes, it is a disenchant that has a little bit of extra utility in terms of exiling cards from graveyard. The issue is Terra Sunder is big because it exiles Enduring Curiosity, and that's one of the premier 4-drop threats in the format, especially after rotation when we lose Shieldred. So there's not as many good answers to Curiosity. There is still Torch the Tower, so Red still has access to that. But yeah, losing Terra Sunder is pretty big against the Curiosities. There's Glissa Sunslayer, which, I mean, insert any black 3-mana creature, you can easily replace this in Golgari. I think a lot of Golgari decks weren't even playing Glissa over the past couple of weeks to begin with. They were leaning more towards Preacher of the Schism, Sentinel of the Nameless City, Unstoppable Slasher, things. There's plenty of 3-mana black creatures. Urbrask's Forge, while not a direct replacement, Case of the Crimson Pulse can do a very good impression at grinding out these Dimir mid-range decks. And then last one on this section, Itali Primal Conqueror, which is a card that sees a little bit of fringe playability in the Reanimator decks, but you can easily replace this with like either Arden the Usurper or Valgaboth Terra's Faithful. I thought I had Atraxa on the list. Did I just not mention Atraxa at all? Maybe I removed the Atraxa, because Atraxa should have been mentioned sort of in the previous, but we can put Atraxa Grand Unifier in this pile because that's sort of another premier Reanimator threat, which that one is harder to replace. But again, I think the combination of Arden and Valgaboth are going to do at least a pretty good job of replacing those, at least in the interim. And now to the moment you've all been waiting for. We're going to talk about some lands, because this is a big point of discussion here. So for those of you who don't know, the lands that are rotating out of standard are all 10 of the Pain lands, which is Karplusan Forest, Underground River, Shivan Reef, Llanowar Wastes, Adarkar Waste, Battlefield Forge, Brushland, Caves of Koilos, Yavimaya Coast, and Sulphurous Springs. Now, you might think, well, when lands are rotating, you would expect the entire cycle of lands to rotate. So when I tell you that we're losing fast lands, Copperline Gorge, Seachrome Coast, Dark Slick Shores, Razorverge Thicket, and Blackcleave Cliffs, you might assume that we're losing the rest of the fast lands. But you would be incorrect in assuming that, because for whatever reason, they decided to split up the fast lands, half in, these ones were in Brothers War, I believe, and then the second half were in Outlaws of Thunder Junction, which wasn't even the next set after Brothers War, because they had, I'm pretty sure it was Wilds of Eldraine, then OTJ. I don't remember the exact timeline, but we had to wait a couple of different sets to get the other fast lands, which now means that we're losing half of them. the reason I have such a problem with this is because there's going to be a huge imbalance in terms of the two color pairs that you can play with regards to dual lands. Again, we're losing half of the fast lands, but not the other half of them. What's also funny about this is we're getting shock lands in the new set, which is awesome. We love shock lands, right? You enter the battlefield untapped if you pay 2 life. They're typed, which means they work very well with verges. There's a small issue, though. We're not getting all 10 because for some reason they just keep doing this, and I don't understand why. So here's the problem. We're losing all the pain lands, rather, excuse me. So those are all gone. We're losing all 10 of those. The fast lands that we are losing are Copperline Gorge. So Copperline is red-green, Seachrome is blue-white, Darkslick is blue-black, Razor Verge is green-white, Blackleaf Cliffs is black-red, right? We're losing those 5. We're not losing the enemy fast lands. So you would think, okay, well, as long as the shock lands that are coming into Edge of Eternities just straight up replace the fast lands, right? If they just did allied shock lands in this set, and then whatever next set they decide to do the shock lands in, could be Avatar, could be Spider-Man, we may have to wait till Lorwyn, nobody knows, then that would be fine. But that would make too much sense, so why would they do that? So the shock lands that we're getting in this set are Stomping Ground, which is Gruul, Godless Shrine, which is Orzhov, Watery Grave, which is Dimir, Breeding Pool, which is Simic, and Sacred Foundry, which is Boros. So of those 5, only 2 of those are replacing the fast lands that are rotating, which would be Darkslick Shores and Copperline Gorge. What does that mean? Well, that means that the 3 remaining guilds, which are Azorius, Rakdos, and Celestia, those 3 guilds are losing a pain land and a fast land. And what are they gaining? Nothing. So the mana is going to be really awkward for very certain 2-color pairs, right? Where you have stuff like Orzhov, Simic, and Boros. Those 3 2-color pairs will have a fast land and a shock land. You have stuff like the remaining enemy color pairs, which is Golgari and Izzet will have a fast land but no shock land. Then you have Gruul and Dimir, which are going to have a shock land but no fast land, and then you have Azorius, Celestia, Rakdos, which have basically nothing. Those 3 color pairs are essentially, I'm not going to say they're unplayable, you can still try to make it work, but this whole imbalance in terms of mana just frustrates me beyond belief, because there's just going to be, like I said, an imbalance in these 2 color pairs, and who knows when we're going to get the remaining shock lands. So yeah, that's my rant on losing lands and things like that. I think this video has been going long enough, so we'll wrap it up there. Apparently this was just this whole video was a ploy for me to complain about the lands that are rotating. If you guys have any suggestions or you got some cards that you're going to miss that are going to be rotating with, I believe the rotation is going to be happening right around when Edge of Eternities comes out. Somebody in my Twitch chat told me it was the end of July. I thought it was the first week of August. Not 100% positive, but right around that same time. But let me know in the comments, what card are you going to be missing the most from the rotation of cards that are going to be gone? And as always, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you guys in the next one.